Good evening. I'm Steve Pleich, and I'll be your host for this segment on Voices from the Village. Many of you know that CTV has revisioned itself into a new kind of a volunteer organization and a station now, and this is the third in our series of new Voices from the Village shows. We had one on campaign finance with our friend Micah Posner was here not long ago. We did a sheriff's forum recently with Sandino Gomez, and this evening we'll be talking about the Downtown Accountability Program. The program, for those who don't know, grew out of a Public Safety Citizens Task Force recommendation to create accountability for chronic low-level offenders. The goal of the DAP is to reduce recidivism among chronic offenders by delivering social services to meet the specific needs of each client through active oversight by the DAP team and the court. So this is really a very interesting and very relevant issue in town. It really has a lot to do with the kind of atmosphere that we'd like to create as a community, and I'm delighted to have with me some folks who are not only knowledgeable about this, but really engaged as citizens in trying to make this program work for the betterment of Santa Cruz. Ron Pomerantz. Ron, welcome from the A.C.L.U. Susie O'Hara, the program coordinator for the program for the City of Santa Cruz, and Jeff Rosell, Deputy District Attorney with the District Attorney's Office, and their point person on this. Let's start just by letting our viewers kind of know a little bit about each one of you. Ron, tell us just a little bit about yourself.
I just have to correct you a little. I'm not representing the A.C.L.U. today,
but you're a member.
but I am a member. I am a board member, and a very proud to be. And I will share that perspective, but I can't represent that. So I'm a 40-year resident of the City of Santa Cruz and a long-time activist, community member, very involved in all kinds of different issues. Mm-hmm. And specifically tonight, to have a vibrant, healthy downtown, this seems a very important issue to me. I think there's a compassionate and humanitarian aspect to the Downtown Accountability Program. And I just think, I gotta say, this program's gotta work, because the old punitive ways of the criminal justice system, they don't work. Chronic offenders, it's a failure. So this program is really essential, and I'm really delighted to be with Susie and Jeff.
We appreciate your perspective. So, and Susie O'Hara, congratulations really on being appointed the program coordinator. I know you have a wealth of experience having worked with the city for a time. Just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so, and I agree with Ron here. I really do hope that this program works. I think it's really going to be a critical program for the community. So I am Susie O'Hara, and I'm actually a water engineer for the water department, raising 3 daughters here with my husband, who is a history professor at UCSC. He teaches Latin American history. Been here since 2006, and really invested in this community, and I have taken a sabbatical from the water department for the last few years, actually, to work on public safety for the City of Santa Cruz. I worked as the program coordinator for the Citizen Public Safety Task Force, for which this recommendation came from, and was recently appointed to take the pilot work and be the coordinator for the pilot work for the DAP program.
Great, fantastic. And Jeff, Deputy District Attorney for our District Attorney's Office here, and basically the point person for that office for the DAP. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
I actually moved to Santa Cruz in the early 80s when I went to college up at UCSC. And moved away, came back in '94, and I've been in the district attorney's office now for, gosh, coming up on 20 years.
Wow, really?
Yeah, so, and in there, basically as the chief deputy or head of the operations, I've done lots of cases in this county, and all sorts of cases. And basically at this point am the point person really for the Downtown Accountability Program from our office. So happy to be here.
Well, welcome. We're really delighted to have you here. And I wanted to take a minute before we really got into the details of the program to share an observation that I had. My first career, I was a technical writer. I wrote audiovisual teaching programs, self-covered textbooks. And one of the basic tenets of our teaching strategy was accountability. And that accountability was that, as Bob Lee mentioned, we're all in. You know, it's not just, you know, providing a service, somebody saying you are getting the service, so it's you that should have the commitment to be able to do what you want to do. We had a teaching model that said, you know, we're going to create teaching programs that are going to allow you to learn, and we want you to commit to actually using those models so you can learn. So it's a very reciprocal approach. And my view of having talked to you before about the accountability program is that there is accountability that flows both ways. You know, the city and county with this partnership is reaching out to try to break the cycle of recidivism by offering some programs, by saying, you know, we want you to have opportunities to kind of break the cycle and do that. And concomitantly, on the other side, there has to be the reciprocal, you know, commitment by the people who are going to be involved in the program to say, yeah, we want to take these options, we want to take these responsibilities, and we want to be part of this, you know, this total solution. What are your observations about that, just as accountability is concerned, Joe?
Well, you're right about the model for this. The model is really to get groups that have already been doing things together to try to look at some front-end solutions for folks who've got issues, and to try to address those issues on the front end and offer, you know, services if that's what's needed, and frankly for people who want to take advantage of those services. And as we know, not everybody does want to take advantage of those services, or at least they don't maybe initially want to take care of or take advantage of those services. So the idea is to offer services in a comprehensive fashion. We can talk a little bit about the details of that on the front end to address problems so that people don't keep reoffending over and over and over. And at the same time, if somebody is not interested in those services and they're going to live in the community and continue to you know, offend and be a problem, then the idea is to collect information about these services were offered, this person hasn't wanted them, so if sentencing does come around, at least the courts are informed about what has taken place, that things have been offered, things have either been accepted and people are doing great, or some people haven't and aren't doing so great.
And Susie, your thoughts about the kind of an accountability, the reciprocal aspect of this program that will really lead to success if it works out?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I think one of the tenets of the task force recommendations was to have much more collaboration around these chronic offenders. And not only is there kind of both, the accountability is going in both directions, but we're all holding each other much more accountable. So I'm holding Jeff and the DA's office accountable, he's holding the city accountable, and everybody that's around the table is really focused on these issues in a much different way. And so I completely agree. I think we're all really focused on this. The accountability is in both directions, and we have really high expectations.
And Ron, as a resident, and not necessarily speaking about civil liberties for the A.C.L.U., there is an accountability that actually flows to the citizenry, the people in the community become engaged and involved in this program to really make it successful.
Absolutely, no question. I mean, the accountability is on all levels. To the people that get swept up because of being a chronic offender, as well as the community needs to be involved. Because, you know, the belief that it has to be a more humanitarian way of dealing with this kind of problem. So, I mean, you know, I don't think you really mentioned, or hasn't been mentioned, the people involved are, you can't pigeonhole anyone. You've got alcoholics, you've got, you know, drug people who are addicted to drugs, you've got mentally ill, you've got homeless. You know, there might be other categories within that, and every one of those needs to be dealt with differently. So that level of accountability is really essential.
And I think it's an important point to be made, and we'll talk about that more as we go along, that these aren't people who aren't being identified because of their status. They're being identified because they're having behavioral problems that are affecting the community, and I think that's important. One thing I was curious about, just as a, you know, as an observer myself, and something I think maybe our viewers would like to know, is kind of the genesis of all this. I know that when the District Attorney Bob Lee first talked about vertical prosecution, and then we're talking about the 100 chronic offender program, and then it became what I think is really much more program-friendly downtown accountability program. Kind of what was the thinking behind that as it moved through?
Well, I'll tell you, it really came out of, and Susie can address this, that there was a task force that generated a report and some information, and Susie's really the person to talk specifically about that. But I think the idea was with generally, and we say low-level offenders, but you know, we're talking about the nature of crimes that are, you know, typically misdemeanors, some felonies, but we're not really talking about violent crimes and that sort of thing. Those are still dealt with by my office and the way we have. But we're talking about folks who are repeatedly getting arrested over and over and over for various offenses. Being drunk in public is one, trespassing, theft, stealing, those sort of things. So the idea was really maybe we can take a look at this and approach it a little differently than we have been. Typically, somebody comes into court, they'll get a sentence, they may serve that sentence, and we've got crowding issues now with the county jail.
Of course, yeah, that's a
And
problem.
they're out, and guess what? In a short period of time, we're back in the same scenario. So the idea was really to try to take a comprehensive look at this based on the task force report and talk, address mental health,
Right.
if that's going to be one of the problems that we have, and it clearly is. Address alcohol issues, if that's, the problem. The same thing with drug addiction, and be there to provide services. And if somebody, as Ron mentioned, needs some help around housing issues, there's certainly, part of that is we're trying to use existing resources and come up with, new ones to try to address those issues for the folks that want, help on the front end. And there's been some encouraging results.
And certainly we'll talk about the housing element of this, which is extremely important in my view. Susie, take us through kind of the process with the Public Safety Citizens Task Force, how those recommendations were generated, and kind of where they went, how this kicked off, from that start.
Right. So a year ago, in March of 2013, Mayor Hillary Bryant appointed a 15-member Citizen Public Safety Task Force, and that was on the heels of a number of really kind of community-focused public safety issues in Santa Cruz. We had a number of violent crimes in a row, culminating with the officer shootings in February. We had a lot of concern over discarded hypodermic syringes in our public spaces. And with that, there was a lot of community outcry on a myriad of issues. So this task force was appointed, 15 members. We ended up with 14 after somebody had to leave for personal reasons. What the focus of the task force was on several things. Sense of safety issues in our community was one of them. Gang violence and violent crime and drug addiction and petty crime associated with drug addiction. So those were kind of the host of issues that we were focused on. And then we brought in a number of expert panelists over a 4-month period to focus on really educating the task force members and bringing everybody up to the same level of awareness in terms of what the issues were. After this educational process, of which Bob Lee actually was one of our expert panelists, they deliberated for a few months on policy recommendations. And this particular recommendation for a vertical prosecution model for low-level chronic offenders was one that the entire task force was behind, and it really encompassed all of the policy recommendations, the broader recommendations from the task force in terms of bringing in preventions to really understand what the root causes of people's criminal behavior was, a different level of accountability and monitoring across the criminal justice system, and then collaboration. And collaboration was really something that the task force focused on. And I think this new downtown accountability program really encompasses all of the task force recommendations. They ended up with 80 recommendations.
Well,
This about 80. And there wasn't complete consensus around all of them by any means, but this one was a very, very strong recommendation that came out of it.
And I can recall when the task force recommendations were reported out to council and Chris Reyes went over and made his report, collaboration was one of the terms was used over and over and over again. We really have to collaborate. We really have to make this a community-wide, a county-wide approach to problems. I know, Ron, you attended some of the Public Safety Citizens Task Force meetings. I know that you put your name in the hat for one of those, as did I. But neither you nor I were chosen. Hillary, let's have that on here. Anyway, what was your view of their work in terms of addressing the public safety concerns that certainly arose in town after certain very tragic watershed events here?
Oh, the response was rather predictable, I thought. Without critiquing or really talking too much at length about the task force, I would prefer just to focus on this particular issue, which I strongly support. And if I could, I'd like to ask Jeff a quick question.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
How this works. So Are people already profiled in advance? Do you have a list of these 100 people, and then if they reoffend, if there's another misdemeanor, if they're drunk in public or something, then they're rearrested?
Now,
Then how does the system deal with this?
Here's
How
what's
does it
happened.
work?
Here's what's happened. Essentially, the folks that are being looked at are the folks that are reoffending over and over and over again. So what my office did was basically try to come up with, look, who is causing the problems down here, not just one or two problems, but who's causing the problems over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And as you might imagine, a lot of those folks, because they're causing problems over and over again, show up on the calendar all the time with a whole host of offenses. So what we've been doing a lot of running and trying to provide services, trying to get the team, which we can talk about in a little bit, together to try to assess what does this person need, what will help them on the front end. Do they need housing? Is it a mental health issue? Can we try to get some treatment around that and fashion sentences that deal with that sort of thing? There are also offenses. The city attorney, who is another part of this, prosecute offenses for failures to appear on citation issues. Citations you don't typically show up into court on right away. It's fines and money. And so what they've been doing, and for quite some time, is they will issue citations, and if somebody has a failure to appear, they don't show up on those over and over and over again, they'll issue a misdemeanor charge which will get somebody into court. So that's the way a lot of folks have been coming in. We also have been talking and are working on trying to get some folks, if they're on the list and they may not have reoffended or right at that moment in time, maybe not even going through the courts and trying to get some sort of direct pathways. You know, if you've got a substance abuse issue, and some of the officers came out of talking to some of the Santa Cruz PD officers, and they're saying, hey, look, if you've got a place for somebody, rather than waiting or going through the court system, if they're out there right now, what we can do is, if you've got a place, we can, take them there directly and maybe bypass some of the court system. So it's a combination of various things.
So there is at least a perspective or a hope for a diversion program?
Yeah, there absolutely is.
Yeah.
There's that is absolutely the case with some of the offenses.
Susie, since we mentioned the word team, why don't you tell us about the team? What are we looking at in terms of what people are doing, what roles they're playing, and how they really can become more effective in really making this program a success?
Sure. So there's Jeff and myself. Jeff represents the DA's office, and he is mostly focused on, well, he's one of the kind of the mentors that we are all following in terms of how we're thinking about prosecuting these people. So he represents the DA's office. I'm with the city, and I do the coordination, which for this pilot is several things. It's thinking about the offenders and developing the team, but also develop the model that we hope will be a sustainable model moving forward. We just hired a case manager through Encompass. Her name is Rayanne Jimenez, and she started last week. She will be really focused on evaluating these offenders at the very front end. So whether they're diverted or they're being arrested and on the court calendar, Rayanne will come in and do an assessment process for mental health, substance abuse, housing, to try to get a really basic understanding, in-depth understanding actually of these people's needs and what are the sources of their criminal behavior. We have Sarah Siegel from probation. She has, her caseload has a lot of overlap with the individuals that are offending downtown, that have a lot of these behaviors downtown. We have Danielle Long from County Mental Health. James Russell, who actually will be replaced somewhat soon. He's our downtown outreach worker. And who else?
City attorney. There's Lauren Volk from the city attorney, and Caio Ariano are the two city attorneys under John Barasoni that have been dealing with the infractions that turn into misdemeanors for failures to appear.
I don't want to go back to that, but something Jeff said struck me. I said, this is going to be, the entry level in this is street level. And street level is where law enforcement is involved. As law enforcement is going to make some kind of a determination about, whether or not this person is best served by diversion, whether they're best served by going through a court process, whether they're best served by, some other means at their disposal. What is that the role that law enforcement is going to play at street level here?
Well, law enforcement, let me just say this right out of the gate. The Sheriff's Office has supported this program and is thoroughly behind it. So is Santa Cruz PD. So it clearly involves those folks. Santa Cruz PD in a much more hands-on role with these folks because, frankly, they're the ones that are arresting them or citing them or doing whatever. So they are going to be involved, frankly, from the ground up and in constant communication, which we are, about who's doing what. If somebody has a stay away, enforcing those stay away orders, that sort of thing. But the other thing that I had mentioned earlier was some of the Santa Cruz officers had indicated that if there are, for certain individuals who are ready for treatment at that time, is a direct pathway in, that they would actually be in a position to assist with that, and that is what Santa Cruz has done. And I will say, when we talk about diversion programs, what that is, for those that may not know, is essentially if you comply, if you do well, if you do certain things for a period of time, then charges can either be dismissed or in certain instances maybe not filed. And that all depends on the level of the charge and what the behavior is.
Yeah.
So, it's a lot of kind of weighing and balancing. Who is this person? Are they on any other, have they committed serious crimes, or are these, kind of these crimes that we've been talking about that take place over and over? There's, because you want accountability. It's not,
Of course,
you know what
yeah.
I mean? So there's a balance of all those
And
things.
do you have an observation on that, Ron? Or?
Well, I wanted to focus back in on the budget. Clearly, the county and the city are serious. It's 300,000 roughly.
Right.
And I guess it's bigger than the downtown, even though that's what it's called. So if one of these 100 chronic offender folks turn up somewhere in the county or somewhere else in the city, is that process still in place? Or is this only focused on the downtown?
The names came out of folks in the downtown area, but you bring up a good point, which is, some folks may say, well, I understand that, but I live in an unincorporated area of the county. How does this affect me? Well, the answer is it does affect you. Financially, it affects you in a big way. And also, as we know, some folks can be reoffending at one point in the downtown area, but some other time later they're reoffending in a different area of the county.
And so they're still part.
They're still part of
Insane.
it,
Yeah.
absolutely.
That's
So it's really focused on the individual and trying to offer, tailor-made services to that individual on the very front end, and kind of working from there. The other, you brought up another good point, Ron, though, about countywide implications of this. There's countywide costs. I'm employed by the county of Santa Cruz, the district attorney's office, mental health, county of Santa Cruz. So there's a lot of county players whose time and resource are being, used over and over and over again on this. And the idea is if you have some success and people stop reoffending over and over and over, you're going to get real financial benefits to the county, to the city, and to all of us.
Right.
And I know that our Chief of Police, Kevin Vogel, has expressed his support for this program, and I think that's important. Have you had an opportunity to talk to Jim Hart, who will be our incoming sheriff, at all? And because I know Jim has been administering the jail for the last 5 years. So that's the chief deputy, that's his job.
Right.
And one of the quotes he had in here was that 5,000 of the 12,000 annual people that go through the jail are having these kind of behavioral problems. So certainly it's alarming for him, and I'm sure that he would want to be supportive of that.
I will say this, we met before we even got off the ground with Sheriff Wowak and the other members. We've met, and Sheriff, or soon to be Sheriff Hart, fully in support of this program from its inception, and fully in support of the program, as we speak. So
Could I get a break? The budget itself, is it? I know it's got to fund you and some stuff within the city and you and your department, but is it also going to help fund the services?
So
To direct people
I
into
can address
housing
that.
and counseling and those kind of things.
Yeah, so we're still in the development phase of the budget. Everybody that I listed that's part of the team is providing their services, so kind of shifting their priorities to allow their staff to be working on the downtown accountability program. I'm funded through the city of Santa Cruz. It's a brand new general fund job. Rayanne Jimenez, who's a case manager, is funded through the county, so we're kind of equally funded in that respect. But in addition, the city of Santa Cruz just last week or the week before, we went and requested additional funding for treatment programs, so treatment and assessment housing. And the council, although they will be deliberating again this week on their budget hearings, did tentatively approve $100,000 of treatment funding for the program, which is really going to be critical, because the way the model works is that the case manager will do these assessments, and we will really look at our existing resources within the county to see if there's places that we can plug people in. So there are a lot of resources, but there also are a lot of barriers to get people into treatment and housing. And so if it is determined that this person cannot be served by existing resources, then we have established this designated funding mechanism to get more people into treatment and hopefully housing. We're going to assess them in shelter housing so they'll have a safe and secure environment for assessments, and then put them into treatment hopefully. So it is going to be a very robust
The facility,
budget.
I mean, the personnel and the facilities exist to start moving folks through this process?
Well, there are beds there. There are unfunded beds. So for instance, at Janus, there are unfunded beds currently.
Yeah.
So there are resources. It's just a matter of staffing up with new budget.
Yeah, I did take a look at the pilot phase budget, which I have here, and it's that the program coordinator, this case manager, Elise. I guess you've gotten very generous terms from folks downtown for an office on Pacific Avenue operating costs, and then the services, the treatment and housing component. And it's one thing that I wanted to talk about, and it's a concern that I expressed when we had our meeting a while back, is that I analogize this to the 180-180 program. Well, 180-180 is certainly a housing first model. And while they have been very successful, Phil Kramer and those folks are fantastic successful in housing their 180 people, you need the wraparound supportive services, not just make these people survive or perhaps begin to break the cycle of recidivism we're talking about, but also to thrive and continue, to be outside of the justice system, to be outside the recidivism cycle. And that's the thing that most concerns me, is whether or not there's going to be that kind of support personnel that is really essential for this program to really, I think, be tremendously successful, as we'd all like to see it be.
Right.
I mean, I think one of the major outcomes and expectations of this pilot is to really understand what the continuum of care is going to look like for these individuals. Each individual will come into this process with a different set of needs, and certainly substance abuse and mental health treatment is just one component of what they need to be successful in rehabilitating. Housing is critical, obviously. We do not want to treat somebody for substance abuse and or mental health and not take the next step and find housing for the individual. So that is one thing that we're really working on right now. We've focused on figuring out a treatment budget that would make sense for the pilot, and this next step is to really dive really deep into what are the paths to housing in our county, which I'm sure both of you know it's a really difficult task.
Tremendously difficult.
Yeah.
It's a great challenge. Ron, do you still sit on the Housing Commission for the county?
County Housing Authority, yes.
Yeah. And he and I both, and I'm sure you know, that the availability of housing vouchers here in Santa Cruz is virtually nil. It's in my role as a city council candidate and as a public person, I've always bemoaned the fact that I haven't really seen a commitment to low and moderate income housing development in the city or county that would really provide some opportunities for people who want to be housed. And one of the things that I saw with 180-180 is that some of the housing vouchers were reprioritized so that people would be able to get in. And I'm not saying that those people aren't deserving and aren't very vulnerable and need to get off the street, but nevertheless there's a finite number of housing vouchers. And if you have a housing component, if for instance the DAP is a housing first model, then we have to have housing for people to get into. To say, you're eligible for these programs, we'd love to help you, break this cycle of recidivism. Do you want to do that? I say, yeah, I want to do that. I want the services. I have some behavioral problems. I understand that. I make bad decisions. I understand that. But I would need some help to do that. I need to be able to have permanent housing, or at least transitional housing into permanent, and the kind of support services that people can say, you know, I'll help you with your voucher, I'll help you to be in compliance with the terms of your tenancy when you do get something, help you get to where you need to get for your counseling or your medical or your financial. And those are the kinds of things that I think underlie a successful program. I know that you both are thinking about this, but it really is a major concern of mine as I analogize it to what I've seen in 180, 180.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I'm so optimistic about is that we're using the model of 180, 180 and the 100-day dash really to focus in a much more collaborative way. I mean, we all bring different experiences to the table. Right. Jeff and I have different perspectives, but when we come to the table and have these conversations, we really are opening our minds and our hearts to thinking about things differently. And I think with that, we're really expecting and hoping to use a lot of the groundwork that they laid with the 180, 180 project to figure out, you know, once we evaluate the client's needs, figure out what kind of treatment, mental health, physical health, substance abuse treatment, really the next step is to figure out what the person's path to housing will be, along with cognitive therapy and job training and all the things that are really required. And so I very much agree that housing is critical, and that's really the next step for the team is to focus on that, and we really have spent the last couple weeks, actually since the beginning, really focused on it, and it's going to be a long road. And
we remind our viewers that even those who may be critical in any way of the program, it's an organic process. Yeah. You know, it's ongoing. You know, you're learning as you go.
It is a program that really kind of launched, and you know, we've been doing what we can. We're figuring it out. We're going to give this it's a pilot program, and the point of that is let's see what works and let's see what doesn't work. Let's see the things that work. Let's try to reinforce those. We really have kind of started off with trying to use existing resources in the county, things that are already there. Some of it, like Susie was saying, beds that are existing that aren't being utilized, which seems like, you know, why don't we do that? So we've already established pathways into those sort of you know, programs that didn't exist before, and the idea is to try to, you know, make use of all this. If it's there, we should be using it. So I do agree that, you know, we have to have long-term goals and long-term plans, but some of that is in place right now, and to the extent that it's in place, we're doing our best to utilize it. And to the extent that maybe some things need to be looked into, we're certainly doing that. But the good news is there's coordination, and it's unbelievable, because you've got coordination right now. City attorney was kind of doing their thing with their cases. DA's office, we were doing our thing. There's coordination and collaboration there. You've got mental health treatment and providers on the front end now engaged and involved. You've got outreach workers. We've got treatment providers that are advisory kind of members that, you know, hey, if we've got a question about treatment for this or that, boom, we've already had meetings. They're right there. They're incredible resources. And pathways to housing, the ones that exist here, those folks we've already spoken to, and they're kind of on board to assist if and when it's needed. So the good news is a lot of the stuff was in place, and it's frankly because of the collaboration, because of the coordination, it's being used a lot more effectively. And you're not going to find one partner, from the police to mental health to treatment providers, that really are not excited about kind of coming together and trying to work together. And that's really what it's about. I mean, a team effort is always better.
Ron, your observations about that?
Yeah, well, what I was thinking, another little piece to put on a list to pursue, I'm a retired firefighter.
Right.
So we had our frequent flyers, as we called, people who, for whatever reason, lots of reasons, usually mental health or drug addicts or drug addiction and alcoholism, we would see them. You know, could be a couple times a shift. So to me, to incorporate, I'm guessing a lot of those same kind of folks are involved in the DAP program, that to pull in Dominican Hospital and pull in AMR, they should be involved. They should help be funding this kind of program, because we're diverting people. We're saving them money.
Right.
We're diverting them. So they should be a part of this, and I haven't heard that. The physical health, you know, mental health for sure, physical health aspects of this, and they get caught up into the system. And so I would
Great,
love to hear that.
great idea, and all I can say is we're absolutely interested in that sort of thing. And you know, sources for funding, sources for collaboration, all
Both-
good,
both.
all good.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And that's a great idea. Ron.
Speaking of collaboration, and when I was reading the literature and the reports and whatnot, this is really being represented as a city-county court collaboration. And I know that we have here in Santa Cruz County a kind of a single judging system. Other counties are not that way. You go to different, you know, for arraignments, different motions are different, pretrials different. They're all, but vertical prosecutions are all about having one judge. And I guess Denise Guy is the
Deneen Guy,
Deneen Guy,
is the
excuse me,
judge who
is the
is
judge.
who has
Now,
been
what's
hearing this.
what's the court's role in this? You know, how are they collaborating? in that
Well,
way?
the court's role is essentially somebody comes in front of the judge. The court's role is to set the terms and conditions of probation if somebody is on either a formal probation or an informal probation, which is called conditional sentence. So what's been happening with the court kind of, and the public defender for that matter, is we're having a conversation. The team has looked at this person. We've tried to identify, this is what we think on the front end could be beneficial for this individual so they don't show up again and again. Communicate that to the public defender, and you know, I'm not saying there's always complete agreement, but there's generally, you know, common sense kind of rules the day, right? So there's some sort of agreement, or if there's some differences, it's, you know, the court sorts that out. The court has been great about setting terms and conditions that are appropriate, and you know, ultimately is there to impose sentences, and we're kind of doing some of the monitoring out there for folks that aren't on formal probation, and bringing people back to court to see how they're doing.
So there is some discussions that take place about a particular person, for instance, before it goes before Judge Guy, where she has a certain amount of information, or is she involved in the discussions as well?
She's been involved in the discussions absolutely on the front end. It's like, hey, this is going to happen today or in the future. This is what we think. This is kind of why we think this. And you know, ultimately, the courts are the one who make determinations and impose sentences.
And our City Attorney, John Barasoni, I'm sure that he's been involved in it as well as a collaborative partner. Kind of what's John's role in this?
John is providing oversight to two deputy city attorneys that are really on kind of the boots on the ground doing the prosecution for the Muni Code offenders.
Right.
So he worked with Bob Lee at the beginning, right after the task force finished, to kind of envision this project.
Right.
But Bob Lee really kind of took it on and spearheaded it took the vision to where we are today. So what Barasoni's office is actually doing, though, is really focused on the prosecution of the Muni Code offenders. But before that, I mean, I'd like to talk a little bit about how the avenues into the program, because I think there's several different ways that people can get into the program, and I think your suggestion that it's really through street outreach is really on point. So that's with PD and also with our downtown outreach worker and with our mental health worker. They really are the eyes and the ears of what's happening downtown. They could identify potential offenders that would, they'd make referrals into the program. We have really a general understanding of who maybe the top 100 people are that are causing the most behavior issues downtown. But it's going to be really flexible. It's going to be, you know, what's happening on a week-by-week basis, who's potentially causing the most trouble. That might be one way to get into it. Who actually is ready for treatment? Right. Who's ready to actually, you know, change their behavior? That's another way. They could not even be offending, and you know, or having the most difficulty. Also, there's people that are being arrested, so that are on the court calendar. So there's many different ways to get into the program. Once people have been identified, that's when we kind of put on the brakes and really try to understand what their needs are. And that's where the program is really different than I think what we've seen before, is that we're spending a lot of time at the beginning to figure out what these people's needs are and to develop a case management program that focuses on physical health and mental health and substance abuse and housing and all the things that potentially are the core issues that are leading to this person's criminal
That's a
behavior.
wise approach. And I did notice, of course, that when I was talking about a city-county court partnership, what is the part that local businesses are playing in this? The downtown merchants, the downtown association, the lodging industry, the boardwalk, for instance, because this certainly impacts, their ability to not only enjoy the downtown themselves, but also to be able to pursue profitably their retail enterprise and things like that. I mean, a better atmosphere downtown really enriches everybody, and it also creates economic development, where there wasn't that before. Are they involved, aside from getting a very nice, lease agreement with the folks downtown, are there other downtown retailers, merchants, local stakeholders who are as engaged in this process as maybe you or I would like to see them be?
Well, we are following a model that's happening in Minneapolis currently, and there's a lot of private funding through their downtown association to run that program. But what we actually are doing is bringing on partners really strategically. And so while we have this core team of 6 or 7 of us that are from probation and the DA's office, we're soon to be hopefully adding a housing partner as well, really formally. We have a treatment and housing advisory committee that's really focused on how do we create paths to housing and treatment with new funding and with existing resources. We're hoping that we can have a more lucrative conversation with our downtown business associations and business partners, because in reality, if this program is successful and if we really are impacting behaviors and crime downtown, it will be a benefit to them as well. So the short answer is we haven't formally brought them in yet, but there's definitely the next step in the pilot.
And the reason I bring that up is that a couple of years back we had a summit on homelessness. And a fellow from LA came up and said, we've been able to do wonderful things down here because we had this funding drive and we raised $15 million because Kobe Bryant was the chair of our funding group, and our Chamber of Commerce was involved, and our downtown association was involved. And it's a wonderful model to look at and say, that's the kind of community engagement you need to address existing issues in town. Santa Cruz hasn't gone that way yet. When they tell us about we don't really get the kind of cooperation in civic programs that I would like to see from the Chamber of Commerce, from the Downtown Association. I think there is much more for them to do. I think they're people of goodwill. I think they would like to see, the downtown atmosphere improve just because they want to make it a better place for everybody to be and enjoy. But nevertheless, they're not there yet, and I would like to see them, make at least some incremental steps toward becoming part of this collaboration you're talking about. If it's truly a collaboration, they really have to be there as well.
That's kind of the beauty of this program, really, is, it starts off, and to be manageable and kind of work it in the beginning, it needs to start off with, kind of a defined number of folks and make some forward progress on this thing, or at least collect data and try to, go forward with it. But the exciting part about it is there really, as it develops, if it works, and that's the other thing, there's no guarantees. We're doing our best. We're putting our efforts in here. It seems like a good common sense, smart model to everybody involved, from, like I say, probation to mental health, to the police, to the DA's office, to, anybody you can think of. It seems like good old-fashioned common sense. But the beauty of it is, as it starts to go forward, and as it starts to work in certain areas, there really is kind of no limit as to what you can do. The partners that you can incorporate, people who have a stake in this community, which frankly is all of us.
And I know that it's an 8-month pilot project.
It is.
And I know Ron, in his excellent email to the council, was asking to extend that. Let's make it a 12-month. Is 8 months going to be enough?
I think it's a great start. Let's be honest. This is pretty resource intensive for a lot of folks, from my office, to all the other ones that we've spoken about. So I think it's a good amount of time to kind of see where we are, see if the idea is working, find out where successes are, and find out, frankly, where we have areas that need some work, and kind of go from there and make some determinations. But all indicators right now, knock on wood, are very positive. Are very positive, and so we'll kind of see where it goes. So I think 8 months is a good amount of time to try to get a handle, to look and to see what's been happening. you know, I will say, and it's a real fluid thing, which is the beauty
Right.
of it too. You know what I mean?
And Ron, your concerns about maybe 8 months not being quite enough? We're born with some experience.
We're into this couple
2
months,
months.
so
I know.
that's your 6 months doesn't seem, because it's evolving, it's new,
Right.
as you've talked about. It just seems really difficult to get things,
Yeah.
to have the data in place to say we're being successful in 6 months from now.
Right.
So that's why I think I would still like to see it extended if the finance and the resources
Yeah.
are there. Have, ask the state for some grants. I don't know. There must be money.
There
for
is
this
there
kind
is
of
some
stuff.
talk about grants. That's very good.
Yeah,
So
nice
yeah,
segue, yeah.
we're clearly looking into sources of funding for all of us, and it's an important goal. You know what I mean? You got to have money to do these things, but you want to spend the money wisely. You know.
Absolutely.
Is
So-
there, in your conversations, in anything like this, that people always talk about metrics? How do we measure our success? What would be an accurate measurement of your success when you're sitting down around the table and you're saying, what we'd like to accomplish, here are our goals, our objectives, here are the metrics we're going to apply. What are those? What are those measurables?
There's a whole lot of different ways to measure. I'll talk about a few, and I think Susie wants to talk about
Of course,
some.
yeah.
There's some very simple ways that you can measure. On the most basic level, you can take an individual and you could look and say, hey, this person on average is reoffending, twice a week or 3 times a week or whatever. Since they've been involved in the program, how does it look? Have they been reoffending? Start with downtown if you want to look at it. Have they been reoffending on Pacific Avenue during this time period? Either yes or no, you're going to get numbers on that. Second question is, well, have they been reoffending anywhere else? That's something else you want to look at. Have you just moved the problem? The other thing is, let's look at some individuals that have successfully completed various treatment programs. How many people have gone through this program, and what's kind of the success rate of that? The other thing is, have people who want help been moved into scenarios where they can get help? Has anybody gotten housing if they want housing and they don't want to reoffend? You know what I mean? So those are ways. I mean, some of them are straight up statistics.
Are there,
some of them
are there a greater
Yeah.
number of people who want to be involved in the program that the resources can accommodate?
right.
But Susie, go ahead. I didn't mean to
Yeah,
interrupt.
so just to carry on with what Jeff was suggesting, I think there's really a quantitative way to look at this and a qualitative way to look at this.
Of course, yeah.
And it really does address your question about the 8-month pilot, whether it's long enough. Recidivism reduction.
Easy for you
It's
to
really
say.
hard. It's so hard. We talked about
I said
not
it in
using.
fr- I
I
said
know
it
we
in front of
talked
me and
about
half a
not.
dozen.
We talked about not using that word, but not because I was not going to be able to say it. I'm not sure everybody knows what it is, but
Well,
it's
It's by offending over and
yeah,
over.
Over and over.
right. So that is one aspect that we can take data on, and it's a very critical part of this
Breaking the cycle of
program.
recidivism
Yeah.
is extremely important.
But to look at the program in a more holistic way, it's really, are the right partners at the table? Are we most effectively using our resources, staffing, funding, budget, all of that? The treatment and housing part of it is really critical. So are we removing barriers to treatment and housing that are currently really a problem here in this county? How we measure that is a little bit more difficult than taking data around repeat offending, but it's something that is going to be really critical to both the county and the city to look at longer term funding of this program. And so I think the treatment and the housing model that will come out of this is really something that's going to be a measure of success. And how many people are we getting into treatment? How well are they working through the program? Are we looking at things in the most cost-effective way? And so the metrics around the program will have this quantitative aspect, but also a very
And I
qualitative
think certainly
aspect.
that if you can show that the cycle of recidivism, really has been broken, I think that's a worthy criminal justice goal.
Sure.
There's no question about it. You work in the criminal justice
Right, that's
system
totally-
yourself, Jeff, and you can understand that we're lightening the court so court time with judges and bailiffs and court times, that's just tremendously expensive.
Right.
Think of the money, and when you're talking about the bottom line, the money that's being budgeted here is really very small in terms of the savings that you get, not only in
most
time, but also in court costs and costs associated costs for continual behavioral problems that people have. And that's just as important to me.
That is the goal, really, to try to save money. And let's be honest, if you got officers out dealing with this stuff, there are other types of crime that this takes up your time. You can't ignore it. You got to deal with it. So, as a prosecutor for going on 24 years now, it's always nice to allocate the resources toward the most serious offenses and do your business there. But unfortunately, police time, DA time, court time, sometimes you do have to deal with other things. And the hope is really to have some success here, measure the success and the savings from that, which should be phenomenal. And on the other hand, if people want to live in the community and aren't willing to try to change their behavior, you got some accountability. You have somebody who's actually keeping track of what's been offered and letting the court know, hey, look, this is what we've tried to do. This person hasn't wanted to do it. And so when you fashion a sentence, it's important to take all of that into account.
And I do think there's a real human element in this. I think it's something that you want to try to reach out to people and say, if you would like to break this cycle of making bad decisions
Right.
and putting yourself in very vulnerable situations repetitively. I had a brief story about a friend of mine that I work with in my law office who had gotten some, low level, he had some drinking problems and a little bit of drug problems, but they kind of exacerbated themselves because he ended up in San Quentin. And this is a guy that just, had a little recreational drink and something else, and he got so many of these offenses, he was so recidivized that it ended up he just compromised his entire life, and a significant part of it in one of the most awful places anybody could think of. And that's the human element of it. You want to reach out to people and say, can we help you? Can we design a program, that's going to be able to reach out to you? And I think it's important that people of goodwill want to do that. There's always, in my mind, a cost-benefit analysis to any social program, to any criminal justice program. And you're certainly mindful of that. All the stakeholders are mindful of it. But is this going to make us a better community? Is this going to make us better people for having attempted to do this? That's just as important a question for me, as it is for any other way.
Yeah, and I think what you're touching upon with the human element has really been the most profound impact on me so far, is to really understand the story of these individuals that we're dealing with right now. I mean, just to have a conversation and understand their story, their history, why they're here, where they're from, what are the challenges that they face in their lives, to take the time to hear that and develop a plan for them that they also, you've built some trust. They know that you're listening. I mean, it's been really, really a positive experience. And I think it's been a positive experience for the team and for the individuals that we've been helping. And so I think the human element is really, while hard to capture in terms of data and measure of success and all of that, it's really something that is critical to this program. And I think it's what's going to be the driver of success is really understanding these people better and taking the time to listen to them.
And I think any program like that helps people to kind of regain the kind of self-respect that they may have sacrificed for making bad decisions over time. And again, we're talking about behavioral problems now, and we're not talking about any other kind of more serious crimes that Jeff and your staff will deal with every day. So I think that's something to consider.
Yeah, I'll be honest, on serious crimes, it's business as usual for us. But we're talking about generally low-level offenders here, folks who, like I say, have just come in over and over and over, and really trying to break that cycle and change that.
Ron, your thoughts?
On the same vein, I was wondering if you could talk about the issue of restorative justice. Because that seems to be a critical piece.
And just
it's kind
why
of
don't we explain that?
Explain that.
Wow, we've
Explain
only 3 minutes.
We have 3 minutes, so that'll be a very brief
explain that
explanation.
and how that changes kind of the criminal justice
so
tact on this.
Check me if my definition is different than Ron's.
It might be.
But the bottom line idea behind restorative justice is essentially that a sentence is fashioned that involves kind of giving back to the community and making the victim in the case whole, whoever that victim may be. So there were some discussions that we've had about a restorative justice model. What does that mean? Well, one of the things that we have talked about trying to put in place, and they are in place for certain things, or perhaps if an individual's been out vandalizing or doing something, that there are ways you can, if they, once they're involved in treatment, if they need it, that they can be on, work crew or do something that is actually kind of giving back to the community.
Yes.
And those, it's not in place now, but we clearly have been talking about that sort of thing. And had a very encouraging discussion just the other day on that. So, like I say, that's kind of the beauty of this program is it starts off one direction, and as it builds. If it's successful in the areas that are successful, there really are kind of a lot of exciting possibilities that are out there for it.
Yeah, I mean, it boils down to the community being accountable to this individual and the individual being
And I
accountable
think
to
that
this community.
gets back to what we were
We'll
talking
start
about
at
at
the
the
very
beginning of the
beginning.
show,
Sure.
and I
Yeah.
think that's really a
Yeah.
wonderful note to kind of wrap this up. Thank you so much all for being here. I know we had a wonderful conversation a couple of weeks back with Erica DeGarmo from the A.C.L.U. and some folks. We appreciate you reaching out to the community. This is one of the opportunities for people here and our listeners to really kind of understand what this program is all about, to get to know the people who are working so hard to make it a success, and why it is in our community's best interest to see that it is a success, to do what we can to be engaged as a community, to make it a better place for all of us. So Jeff, thank you so much
Thank
for
you
being
very
here.
much
Thank
for
you
having
your
me.
work.
Appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Susie,
Thank
a
you.
pleasure.
Thanks, Steve.
And Ron,
Yeah.
always a pleasure to see you, my friend.
It was a pleasure. It was
Ron.
great.
Yeah, thanks,
Very
Ron.
nice.
Thank you,
So
guys.
we'll
That's
be
great.
looking for
This
the
is
program
wonderful.
as we
It's
go
great.
forward. All of you out there, this has been Voices from the Village, and I've been Steve Pleich for our producer, Charlie Phillips. For all the folks in the engineering room and behind the cameras, without whom this program could not go on, thank you so much. And good night from Voices from the Village. See you next week.